1 year had passed since Sarah Mitchell became Chief Justice. The state Supreme Court building buzzed with excitement on this special morning. Today was the official launch of the Equal Justice Initiative, a program that had grown from the seeds of that unexpected incident between a judge and a lawyer. Sarah stood at the podium in the main hall, looking out at the crowd. News cameras flashed as she prepared to speak. In the front row sat Judge Brennan, now one of her most trusted advisors on judicial reform. 1 year ago, Sarah began, $1,000 fine taught us $1 million lesson about justice. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. Today, I'm proud to announce that our state has become a national model for judicial reform. She gestured to a large screen behind her, which displayed impressive statistics. Complaints about unfair treatment down by 75%. Public trust in courts up by 60%. Over 200 judges successfully completed the new bias training program. Community satisfaction ratings at an all-time high. Judge Brennan listened with pride, remembering his own journey. His courtroom was now featured in legal textbooks as an example of fair justice in action. Just last week, a national news team had visited to document his transformation story. After Sarah's speech, a young black law student approached Judge Brennan. "Sir," she said nervously, "I read about how you changed. It made me believe I could become a judge too." "What's your name?" he asked kindly. "Maria Thompson," she replied. "Actually, I'm Jessica Thompson's daughter, the woman from the eviction case that day." Judge Brennan's eyes widened in recognition. "Your mother helped change the course of justice without even knowing it." Later that afternoon, Sarah hosted a special session where community members could share their experiences with the new court system. An elderly Hispanic man stood up to speak. "6 months ago, I had a case in Judge Brennan's court," he said. "I was scared because I'd heard stories about him. But he listened to me, really listened. He even spoke a few words in Spanish to make me feel welcome." Judge Brennan, sitting quietly in the back, felt tears in his eyes. He remembered learning those Spanish phrases specifically to help Spanish-speaking citizens feel more comfortable in his courtroom. During the lunch break, Sarah and Judge Brennan shared a quiet moment in her office, just like they had 1 year ago. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the newspaper headlines about their judicial reform success. "Never," he admitted. "I was so focused on being strict, I forgot about being just. You taught me that justice without compassion isn't justice at all." Sarah smiled. "And you taught everyone that it's never too late to change." That evening, a special dinner was held to celebrate the program's launch. Judges, lawyers, and community leaders gathered together. Among them were familiar faces: Tom Reynolds, Judge Rodriguez, and even the young barista who had once misspelled Brennan's name. Sarah's daughter Jasmine, now a newly qualified lawyer, gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes. "My mother taught me that true power isn't about having authority," she said. "It's about using that authority to lift others up." Today, we're not just celebrating new programs or statistics, we're celebrating the power of transformation. As the evening wound down, Judge Brennan found himself chatting with Jessica Thompson and her daughter Maria. "You know," Jessica said, "that day when you fined Ms. Mitchell, I thought the system would never change. Now my daughter wants to become a judge." "And she will?" Judge Brennan replied confidently. "Because now we have a system that welcomes everyone." Before leaving, Sarah gathered everyone for a photo. Judge Brennan stood beside her, both of them smiling broadly. The photograph would later hang in the courthouse lobby with the caption, "Change begins with understanding." That night, as Judge Brennan drove home, he passed his courtroom. The lights were off, but he could see the new sign clearly: "Justice serves all equally." His phone buzzed with a final message from Sarah. "Thank you for helping prove that when we acknowledge our mistakes and work to fix them, amazing things happen." Looking at the message, Judge Brennan thought about how a single incident had sparked such massive change. What had started as $1,000 fine had transformed into a priceless lesson about justice, dignity, and the power of second chances. In the end, he said to himself, justice isn't just about following laws. It's about changing hearts, including our own. 6 months had passed since Judge Brennan's meeting with Chief Justice Mitchell. His courtroom, once known for its strict and sometimes unfair atmosphere, had become a very different place. On this particular Monday morning, a young Hispanic woman stood before him, trembling slightly. She was 10 minutes late for her hearing. "Ms. Rodriguez," Judge Brennan said kindly, "I see you're running a bit late. Would you like to explain why?" The woman, surprised by his gentle tone, explained how her babysitter hadn't shown up, and she had to wait for her mother to come watch her sick child. "Thank you for explaining," Judge Brennan replied. "Family emergencies are understandable. Let's proceed with your case now that you're here." Tom Reynolds, watching from the gallery, could hardly believe this was the same judge who had fined Sarah Mitchell $1,000 for being 5 minutes late just months ago. During the lunch break, Judge Brennan sat in his chambers, reviewing his morning cases. On his desk sat a new edition, a small plaque that read "Justice Sees with the Heart." It was a gift from the Bias Training Committee he now led every Wednesday. His clerk, James, knocked on the door. "Judge, there's something you should see." He handed over the local newspaper. The headline read, "Local Judge's Transformation Inspires Statewide Changes." The article detailed how Judge Brennan's public acknowledgement of his past biases and his work to change had inspired other judges across the state. It mentioned how his courtroom had become a model for fair treatment, with complaints dropping to 0 in the past 3 months. As he read, his phone buzzed with a message from Chief Justice Mitchell. "Have you seen today's paper? Your story is making a difference. Committee meeting at 3? At the committee meeting that afternoon, Judge Brennan shared his latest initiative. "I've been mentoring 3 new judges," he explained to the group, "teaching them what I've learned about recognizing and overcoming biases." Sarah listened with approval. "How are they responding?" "Better than I expected," he replied. One of them admitted he never realized how his background affected his decisions until we talked. After the meeting, Judge Brennan visited the local law school, where he had started teaching a monthly class on judicial ethics. Today's topic was learning from mistakes, a judge's journey to fair justice. The classroom was packed. Students leaned forward, listening intently as he shared his story. Among them sat his daughter Emily and Sarah's daughter Jasmine, both now in their final year of law school. 6 months ago, he told the students, "I thought being a good judge meant being tough and strict. I didn't realize I was being unfair. It took someone I had wronged becoming my boss to open my eyes." A student raised her hand. "But Judge Brennan, wasn't it embarrassing to admit your mistakes so publicly?" He smiled. "Growth is more important than pride. Every day in my courtroom now, I see the difference it makes when people feel heard and respected, regardless of their background." That evening, Judge Brennan received an unexpected visitor in his chambers. Jessica Thompson, the young mother whose case he had heard the day he fined Sarah Mitchell. "I came to thank you," Jessica said. "I was in your courtroom last week for my friend's case. The way you treated everyone, it was so different. You actually listened." Judge Brennan felt his eyes getting moist. "Thank you for telling me that. It means a lot." Later at home, while having dinner with Eleanor, he shared the day's events. "You know what the biggest change is?" he told his wife. "I sleep better now. No more wondering if I made decisions based on the wrong reasons." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "The person you've become, this is who you were always meant to be." Just then, his phone lit up with another message from Chief Justice Mitchell. "Tomorrow's newspaper will announce our new statewide judicial training program. Your story will be featured as the inspiration. Thank you for proving that real change is possible." Judge Brennan smiled, remembering how different things had been just 6 months ago. His transformation wasn't just personal, it was creating ripples throughout the entire judicial system. As he prepared for bed, he thought about tomorrow's cases. For the first time in his career, he was truly looking forward to listening to each person's story, to seeing them as individuals rather than just cases to be processed. Sometimes, he whispered to himself, our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest improvements. 3 weeks after the judges' meeting, Judge Brennan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie. Today was different from any other day in his career. He had scheduled a private meeting with Chief Justice Mitchell to discuss his path forward. His wife Eleanor helped him with his tie. "Remember, Will," she said gently, "this isn't just about saying sorry. It's about showing you want to change." The drive to the state Supreme Court building felt longer than usual. As he passed his own courthouse, Judge Brennan noticed something he'd never paid attention to before: the worried faces of people walking up the steps, especially those who looked different from him. At exactly 10 a.m., Judge Brennan sat in Chief Justice Mitchell's new office. The room was warm and welcoming, with photos of her family on the desk and law books lining the walls. Sarah Mitchell entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I remember you take it black," she said, handing him a cup. "From that cafe across from your courtroom." Judge Brennan accepted the coffee with trembling hands. "Chief Justice Mitchell, I—" "Please," she interrupted softly. "Call me Sarah for this conversation. We're just 2 people trying to make things better." "Sarah," he started again, "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About that day, about all my days on the bench. I was wrong, not just with you, but with so many others." Sarah listened quietly as he continued. "Yesterday, I looked through my records from the past year. I found something disturbing." His voice cracked slightly. "I find minority defendants an average of 40% more than white defendants for the same offenses. I never even realized I was doing it." Sarah nodded. "Awareness is the first step, Judge Brennan. What do you plan to do with this information?" "I want to make it right," he said firmly. "But I don't know how. Simply saying sorry feels inadequate." Sarah stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the city below. "Let me tell you a story," she said. "When I was a young lawyer, a judge once told me I didn't belong in his courtroom. Instead of getting angry, I worked harder. I decided to change the system from within." She turned back to face him. "That's what I'm offering you now, a chance to be part of the change." Judge Brennan sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I'm forming a committee," Sarah explained, "to review and reform our court's bias training program. I want you to be on it." Judge Brennan's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? But after what I did?" "Exactly because of what you did," Sarah said firmly. "You've seen both sides now. You understand why change is necessary. Your experience could help other judges recognize their own biases." As they talked, Sarah outlined her plans for the committee. Judge Brennan would work with other judges, community leaders, and civil rights attorneys to create new guidelines for judicial conduct. But Sarah added seriously, "This isn't just about attending meetings. I expect you to implement what you learn in your own courtroom. People will be watching." Judge Brennan nodded solemnly. "I understand. I want to do better." Before leaving, he asked one last question. "Why are you giving me this chance?" Sarah smiled. "Because true justice isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. You could have fought back, denied your biases, or retired early. Instead, you're here, willing to learn and change. That's what our system needs." As Judge Brennan walked back to his car, he felt lighter somehow. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from his daughter Emily, a first-year law student. "Dad, I heard about your meeting with Chief Justice Mitchell. I'm proud of you for trying to make things right. Can we talk about it over dinner?" That evening, as he shared dinner with Emily, Judge Brennan realized something important. His attempt at amends wasn't just about his own redemption. It was about creating a better justice system for his daughter's generation and all those who would come after. "You know, Emily," he said, "sometimes life's hardest lessons turn out to be the most valuable." Emily smiled. "And sometimes," she added, "the best teachers are the ones we least expect." Judge Brennan couldn't help but agree, thinking about his upcoming role on the committee. Tomorrow would be his first day back in court since his meeting with Sarah, and for the first time in 30 years, he was looking forward to doing things differently. Judge William Brennan sat alone in his living room, staring at his television in disbelief. The evening news was playing a special report about Sarah Mitchell's successful confirmation hearing. The reporter's words echoed in his ears. "In a historic vote of 15-0, Sarah Mitchell has been confirmed as our state's new Chief Justice. She will begin her duties next month." His coffee cup shook slightly in his hands as he remembered how he had treated her. His wife, Eleanor, walked into the room just as a clip showed Sarah speaking about fair treatment in courts. "Will, you've been watching the news for hours," Eleanor said softly. "Maybe it's time to talk about what's bothering you." Judge Brennan muted the TV and turned to his wife. "I made a terrible mistake, Eleanor. That woman I fined 2 weeks ago, the one I told you about, she's going to be my boss. Not just mine, but every judge's boss in the state." Eleanor sat down beside him. "Is this about the fine, or is it about something deeper?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Judge Rodriguez. Emergency judges meeting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. Chief Justice Mitchell wants to address all judges. Attendance mandatory. That night, Judge Brennan couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, remembering every detail of that morning in his courtroom. He had been so quick to judge, so eager to show his authority. Now, looking back, he saw things differently. The next morning, Judge Brennan arrived at the state Supreme Court building 30 minutes early. The grand conference room was already half full with nervous-looking judges. Many were discussing the changes Sarah Mitchell might bring. "I heard she's planning to review every complaint filed against judges in the past 5 years," whispered Judge Thompson, sitting next to him. "Well, some of us might have more to worry about than others," replied Judge Parker, giving Brennan a meaningful look. At exactly 9 a.m., Sarah Mitchell walked into the room. She looked different today, more powerful, more assured. Every judge stood up as she entered. "Good morning," she began, her voice firm but kind. "I've called this meeting because changes are coming to our judicial system, and I want every one of you to understand what those changes mean." She walked around the room as she spoke, making eye contact with each judge. When she reached Judge Brennan, she paused briefly. "2 weeks ago, I experienced firsthand how it feels to be on the receiving end of unfair treatment in a courtroom." She didn't need to mention specifics. Everyone knew the story. That experience, while unfortunate, showed me exactly why our system needs change. Judge Brennan felt his face grow hot as several colleagues glanced his way. "Starting next month," Sarah continued, "we will implement mandatory bias training for all judges. We will also create a new system for reviewing judicial conduct. But most importantly, we will work together to build a justice system that truly serves everyone equally." After the meeting, Judge Brennan waited until everyone else had left. He approached Sarah's podium with hesitant steps. "Chief Justice Mitchell," he began, his voice unusually quiet, "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. "Judge Brennan, do you know why I didn't mention your name during my speech?" He shook his head. "Because this isn't about embarrassing anyone. It's about learning and growing. Tell me, what have you learned from this experience?" Judge Brennan took a deep breath. "I've learned that I've been using my power wrong all these years. I thought being strict meant being fair, but I wasn't being fair at all." Sarah nodded. "Tomorrow, you'll return to your courtroom. People will know what happened between us. What matters now is what you do next." As Judge Brennan walked to his car, he felt different. For the first time in his 30 years on the bench, he was thinking about justice in a new way. His phone buzzed. It was an email with his first bias training schedule, starting next week. That evening, as he sat in his office reviewing case files, he noticed something he'd never paid attention to before. How many times he'd been harsher with minorities, how often he dismissed explanations without listening. The revelation wasn't comfortable, but he knew it was necessary. Sometimes, he muttered to himself, remembering Sarah's words, "The best lessons come from unexpected teachers." The state capitol building buzzed with energy on the morning of Sarah Mitchell's confirmation hearing. Television crews lined the hallways, and every seat in the grand hearing room was filled. This was no ordinary confirmation. Everyone knew they were about to witness history in the making. Sarah sat at the witness table, calm and composed in her dark blue suit. Behind her sat her daughter Jasmine, her parents, and dozens of supporters. She noticed Judge Brennan slip quietly into the back row, trying to remain unnoticed. Senator James Wilson, the committee chairman, called the hearing to order with a bang of his gavel. "Today we consider the nomination of Sarah Mitchell for the position of Chief Justice of our state Supreme Court. Ms. Mitchell, are you ready to proceed?" "Yes, Senator," Sarah replied clearly into the microphone. "I am ready." The questions began, each senator taking their turn. They asked about her background, her cases, and her vision for the future. Sarah answered each question with confidence and clarity, never once showing nervousness. Then came the question everyone had been waiting for. Senator Lisa Chen leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Ms. Mitchell, there's been much talk about an incident in Judge Brennan's courtroom 2 weeks ago. Would you share your thoughts on that experience?" The room grew so quiet you could hear a pin drop. In the back row, Judge Brennan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Sarah took a sip of water and smiled. That incident taught me something important about our justice system. When I was fined $1,000 for being 5 minutes late due to a traffic accident, without being allowed to explain, I saw firsthand how it feels to be on the receiving end of unfair treatment. She paused, looking around the room. But this isn't about one incident or one judge. It's about making sure our courts treat everyone fairly, whether they're a seasoned attorney or a single mother fighting eviction, whether they're white or black, rich or poor. And how would you ensure this fairness? Another senator asked. By implementing 3 key changes, Sarah replied confidently. First, mandatory bias training for all judges and court staff. Second, a transparent system for handling complaints about judicial conduct. And third, regular community meetings where citizens can share their experiences and concerns about our courts. The questioning continued for hours. Sarah shared stories from her 15 years of practice, helping domestic violence survivors, fighting for workers' rights, and defending people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers. During the lunch break, Sarah overheard 2 janitors discussing the hearing while they cleaned nearby. "Did you see how she handled those tough questions?" one whispered. "Not once did she get angry about that judge who fined her. That's the kind of person we need in charge." 1 week later, on a bright Monday morning, Sarah Mitchell stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting her pearl necklace. Today wasn't just any ordinary day. It was her final interview for the Chief Justice position. Her phone had been buzzing since dawn with good luck messages from colleagues and friends. "Mom, you're going to crush it," her daughter Jasmine said, appearing in the doorway. A college senior studying law herself, Jasmine had inherited her mother's determination. "Just like you crushed it in Judge Brennan's courtroom last week." Sarah smiled, remembering how news of that incident had spread through the legal community like wildfire. Sometimes, honey, the best response to unfairness is to rise above it with grace. At the state Supreme Court building, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. 5 senior judges, including Judge Torres, sat behind a long mahogany table. Sarah entered the room with confidence, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "Ms. Mitchell," Judge Torres began, "your record speaks for itself. 15 years of practice, over 200 successful cases, and a reputation for fairness that's well known throughout the state. But today, we'd like to discuss your vision for our judicial system." For the next 2 hours, Sarah outlined her plans for reform. She spoke about making courts more accessible to poor communities, implementing bias training for judges, and creating a more transparent system for handling complaints against court officials. "And what about personal experiences?" one judge asked. "Can you share a moment that shaped your understanding of what our courts need?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Just last week, I was fined $1,000 for being 5 minutes late to court due to a traffic accident. The judge didn't allow me to explain. He didn't show any interest in understanding the circumstances." She paused, looking each committee member in the eye. "That experience only strengthened my belief that our system needs leaders who understand both sides of the bench." The room fell silent. Several judges nodded knowingly. That afternoon, while Sarah was back in her office reviewing case files, her secretary burst in without knocking, something she had never done before. "They've made their decision," she exclaimed, holding up her tablet. "It's all over the news." Sarah quickly pulled up the local news website. The headline made her heart stop. "Historic nomination. Sarah Mitchell selected as state's first black female Chief Justice." Within minutes, her office was flooded with flowers, calls, and visitors. Judge Torres arrived personally to offer congratulations. The vote was unanimous, she revealed, hugging Sarah. "Your handling of the Brennan incident actually sealed the deal. You showed exactly the kind of composure and dignity we need in a Chief Justice." Meanwhile, across town in courtroom 302, Judge Brennan was wrapping up his afternoon session when his clerk whispered something in his ear. His face turned pale as he read the news on the clerk's phone. "Court is adjourned," he announced abruptly, his voice shaking slightly. In the following hours, news crews gathered outside the courthouse. Several reporters tried to get Judge Brennan's comment about his future boss being someone he had recently fined, but he slipped out through a back door. Back in her office, Sarah received a call from an unexpected person, the young mother she had been representing in Brennan's court the day of the incident. "Ms. Mitchell," Jessica Thompson said, crying happy tears, "I just saw the news. You're going to change things, aren't you? Make them better for people like me. That's the plan, Jessica, Sarah replied warmly. Justice should work the same for everyone, regardless of who they are or what they look like. As the day drew to a close, Sarah stood at her office window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Judge Brennan. Congratulations on your appointment, Ms. Mitchell. I would appreciate an opportunity to meet with you at your convenience. Sarah smiled, thinking about how life had its own way of teaching lessons. She typed a simple reply. Thank you, Judge Brennan. My office will be in touch to schedule a meeting. I look forward to working together for positive change in our judicial system. The message was clear. Things were about to change, but not for revenge. They would change for justice, real justice, the kind that sees everyone equally under the law. 2 days after the courtroom incident, Sarah Mitchell sat in her downtown office on the 32nd floor, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. The morning sun reflected off nearby buildings, creating a golden glow that usually lifted her spirits. But today, her mind was occupied with something else. Her office phone rang, breaking her thoughts. Sarah Mitchell speaking, she answered professionally. Sarah, it's Judge Maria Torres from the State Selection Committee, the familiar voice said. Do you have a moment to talk about your Supreme Court nomination? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had applied for the position of Chief Justice 6 months ago, but with everything happening recently, it almost slipped her mind. Of course, Judge Torres. I always have time for you. The committee has reviewed all candidates, and you're our top choice, Judge Torres said warmly. But there's something you should know. Judge Brennan submitted a complaint about you yesterday, citing unprofessional conduct and tardiness. Sarah laughed softly, surprising even herself. Is that so? She asked, thinking about the irony of the situation. Don't worry, Judge Torres continued. We've already looked into it. Several attorneys who were present that day have contacted us independently. They've all mentioned the unusual severity of your fine. Some have even provided written statements about witnessing different treatment based on, she paused diplomatically, various factors. As they talked, Sarah's assistant knocked on her door, bringing in the morning newspaper. The headline caught her eye. State Supreme Court seeks new leadership. Historic changes expected. After ending the call, Sarah read the article carefully. It mentioned that the current Chief Justice was retiring next month, and the state was looking for someone who could bring fresh perspective and meaningful reform to the judicial system. Near the bottom, she saw her name listed as a frontrunner, alongside 2 other candidates. Later that afternoon, Sarah met with Tom Reynolds at a small cafe across from the courthouse. The place was quiet, with only a few other customers sitting far enough away for private conversation. You wouldn't believe what's happening in Brennan's courtroom since Tuesday, Tom said, stirring his coffee. He's trying to prove he's not biased. This morning, he was extra nice to every minority attorney. It was almost uncomfortable to watch. Sarah sipped her tea thoughtfully. He doesn't know about the Supreme Court nomination, does he? Not a clue, Tom chuckled. He's been bragging to other judges about how he maintains strict discipline in his courtroom. But here's the interesting part. Judge Rodriguez is on the selection committee, and she's been quietly documenting his behavior patterns for months. Sarah raised her eyebrows. Months? Why? Apparently, several complaints have been filed against him over the years. Nothing ever stuck because no one wanted to challenge him openly. But now, Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. Your incident might be the tipping point. The committee's looking for someone who understands the need for change in the system. Your handling of Tuesday's situation, it proved exactly why you're the right person for Chief Justice. As they talked, Sarah noticed Judge Brennan himself walk into the cafe. He didn't see them, sitting in their corner booth. She watched as he ordered his usual black coffee, speaking sharply to the young black barista who accidentally spelled his name Brian instead of Brennan. Some people, Sarah said quietly, don't realize that true justice isn't about wielding power. It's about using authority to protect and serve everyone equally. Tom nodded, then smiled mischievously. You know what's funny? If you get the position, and it's looking very likely, you'll be in charge of reviewing judicial conduct across the state, including his. That's not why I want this position, Sarah said firmly. This isn't about one judge or one incident. It's about making real changes in how our courts serve everyone. As they finished their lunch, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message. The final interview for the Chief Justice position was scheduled for next week. She looked across the cafe at Judge Brennan, who was now leaving with his coffee, still completely unaware that the attorney he had found might soon become his boss. Sometimes, she said to Tom, gathering her things, the best lessons about justice come from experiencing injustice firsthand. Let's see what lessons the future holds for all of us. On a busy Tuesday morning in downtown Atlanta, the marble hallways of the Superior Court buzzed with the usual activity. The old clock on the wall showed 9:05 a.m. as Sarah Mitchell rushed through the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 302, her heart beating fast. She was 5 minutes late, the first time in her 15-year career as an attorney. Judge William Brennan looked up from his bench, his cold gray eyes fixing on Sarah as she entered. At 62 years old, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he had earned a reputation as the strictest judge in the circuit. His courtroom started exactly at 9:00 a.m., not a minute later, not a minute earlier. "Ms. Mitchell," his voice boomed across the courtroom, making several people jump in their seats. "You are late." Sarah, dressed in a navy blue suit and carrying her leather briefcase, stood straight. Her client, a young mother of two fighting an eviction notice, sat nervously in the gallery. "Your Honor, I sincerely apologize. There was a major accident on I-85. 3 cars were involved, and emergency services had completely blocked." Silence. Judge Brennan's gavel came down with a sharp crack. The sound echoed through the now silent courtroom. "I don't want to hear excuses. Every attorney knows my courtroom begins promptly at 9. Your tardiness shows disrespect for this court and everyone present." Sarah took a deep breath, keeping her composure despite the humiliation. Through the corner of her eye, she could see other lawyers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Many of them had arrived just minutes before her, barely making it on time themselves. "But Your Honor," Sarah began again, her voice steady and professional, "if you would allow me to explain." Judge Brennan's face turned a shade redder. "Miss Mitchell, are you arguing with me?" He leaned forward, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. "I've observed that you've been taking liberties with this court's patients for some time now." Sarah blinked in surprise. This was only her 3rd appearance in his courtroom, and the previous 2 times she had arrived 20 minutes early. She noticed a few whispers among the other attorneys, and one of her colleagues, Tom Reynolds, shaking his head slightly. "Your Honor, I respectfully disagree. I have always." "That's it." Judge Brennan's voice filled the room. "Ms. Mitchell, I find you in contempt of court. You will pay a fine of $1,000 by the end of business today." He shuffled some papers on his desk, as if the matter was settled. The courtroom fell into a shocked silence. $1,000 for being 5 minutes late was unheard of, especially for a first-time offense. Sarah stood there, her brown eyes meeting the judge's stern gaze. She could feel her heart pounding, but years of courtroom experience helped her maintain her professional demeanor. "Yes, Your Honor," she said quietly, her dignity intact despite the unfair treatment. She took her seat beside her nervous client, Jessica Thompson, who whispered, "I'm so sorry, Ms. Mitchell. This is all because you're helping me with my case." Sarah gave Jessica a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it. Let's focus on keeping you and your children in your home." As the morning proceeded, Sarah presented her case with the same excellence she was known for. Despite the earlier incident, her arguments were clear, her evidence well organized, and her presentation flawless. Several times, even Judge Brennan seemed impressed, though he tried not to show it. During the morning recess, several attorneys approached Sarah in the hallway. "This was completely unfair," said Maria Rodriguez, a longtime colleague. "I've seen white attorneys walk in 10 minutes late, and he barely bats an eye." "We all know what this is about," Tom Reynolds added quietly, looking around to ensure no one else could hear. "But you handled it with such grace, Sarah. That's why you're one of the best." Sarah thanked them but kept her thoughts to herself. As she walked to the water cooler, she overheard 2 court clerks discussing something about the state Supreme Court needing new leadership. She smiled slightly, knowing something that Judge Brennan didn't. Something that would make today's incident even more significant in the weeks to come. As she returned to the courtroom, Sarah held her head high. Today might have been humiliating, but she had learned long ago that true power wasn't about having authority. It was about how you used it. And someday soon, she would have the chance to show exactly what that meant.